In the heart of America, far from the bustling streets of New York or the sprawling tent cities of Los Angeles, a silent and devastating crisis is unfolding in Iowa. For many people, Iowa represents farmland, small towns, and family values, a place seemingly shielded from the chaos of big city problems. Yet beneath this quiet exterior lies a growing tragedy that is claiming countless lives: the fentanyl crisis. At the center of this storm are the homeless, who already live on society's margins and are now being pushed over the edge by a drug deadlier than anything this country has seen before. This is not just about addiction. It is about survival, despair, and a system unprepared for what is killing the most vulnerable people in America's heartland. The story begins with understanding what fentanyl is. For decades, drugs like heroin and meth dominated the headlines. But fentanyl changed the game entirely. It is a synthetic opioid many times more powerful than morphine or heroin, and even a dose as small as a few grains of salt can kill. While it was originally created for medical purposes, used in controlled environments to treat severe pain, its illegal versions are now mass-produced, smuggled, and mixed into street drugs. Dealers lace fentanyl into everything from fake painkillers to meth, making it nearly impossible for users to know what they are taking. For the homeless, who often do not have access to clean supplies or stable environments, this uncertainty turns every dose into a gamble with death. In Iowa, this crisis has taken on a unique and devastating shape. The state has long struggled with limited mental health resources and a shortage of addiction treatment facilities. Rural areas, where hospitals and clinics are already scarce, leave many without access to life-saving care. When fentanyl entered the drug supply, it hit like a storm. Suddenly, overdoses skyrocketed. Law enforcement officials began finding fentanyl not only in heroin but also in methamphetamine and counterfeit pills that looked identical to prescription medications. For someone on the streets, already battling poverty, trauma, or untreated illness, the risk of accidental overdose became a daily reality. Statistics tell part of the story. In the last few years, fentanyl-related deaths in Iowa have surged, doubling and even tripling in some counties. But behind those numbers are human beings: fathers, daughters, veterans, teenagers, many of them homeless or on the brink of homelessness. A missed paycheck, a medical bill, or a broken family relationship often sets the stage for life on the streets. Once there, fentanyl becomes both an escape and a trap, numbing pain while simultaneously tightening its deadly grip. Outreach workers in cities like Teden Ones and Cedar Rapids describe scenes that sound more like war zones than Midwestern towns. Paramedics routinely carry Narcan, a life-saving drug that reverses opioid overdoses, but even multiple doses are sometimes not enough to revive someone poisoned by fentanyl. Shelters and soup kitchens are overwhelmed, struggling to keep up with the influx of people seeking refuge. Police departments report that nearly every drug bust now involves fentanyl in some form. What was once a distant problem associated with coastal cities has now become Iowa's grim new reality. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the crisis is how invisible it remains. Iowa does not have sprawling tent encampments like California, which often draw national attention. Homelessness in the Midwest often looks different: people couch surfing, sleeping in cars, or hiding in abandoned buildings. This makes the problem easier to ignore, but no less deadly. Those living on the margins are slipping away quietly, their deaths chalked up to overdoses without the broader recognition of the systemic crisis fueling them. The human cost is staggering. Take the story of a man named Jacob, a 34-year-old who lost his job in a factory downsizing. Without savings, he quickly fell behind on rent and ended up living in his car. Depression followed, and soon someone introduced him to fentanyl, laced pills marketed as painkillers. Within months, Jacob was gone, found unconscious in a parking lot. His story is not unusual. It is repeated in different forms across Iowa, a cycle of economic hardship, despair, and deadly addiction. What makes the fentanyl crisis particularly cruel is that it thrives in environments where hope is already scarce. Homeless individuals often use drugs as a way to cope with hunger, cold, or trauma. Fentanyl, cheap and potent, floods those same environments. It promises escape but delivers death. Communities that pride themselves on tight-knit values and resilience are now facing funerals for neighbors, friends, and family members lost too soon. Policy responses so far have been patchwork at best. While some counties have expanded access to Narcan and invested in public education campaigns, treatment centers remain in short supply. Waiting lists for rehabilitation programs stretch for months, an eternity for someone battling a drug that can kill them tomorrow. Rural sheriffs call for tougher crackdowns on traffickers, but many experts argue that without addressing the underlying issues, poverty, homelessness, and lack of mental health care, the crisis will only deepen. Iowa's fentanyl tragedy is a reminder that no place is immune. The image of America's heartland as safe and insulated is crumbling under the weight of this epidemic. For the homeless, already invisible in so many ways, fentanyl has become both a weapon and a sentence until the state and the nation confront these. The housing shortages, treatment gaps, and systemic failures that leave people vulnerable. The deaths will continue to rise. The cornfields and small towns of Iowa may look peaceful, but behind that quiet lies a storm. And unless it is faced with urgency and compassion, fentanyl will continue to claim the lives of those who have the least and who need help the most. In Iowa, the crisis has grown rapidly over the past decade. Data from state health officials shows a sharp rise in opioid-related deaths, with fentanyl being the driving force. In 2015, fentanyl barely registered on Iowa's radar, but by 2025, it is at the center of nearly every overdose case. What makes this particularly deadly for the homeless population is not just the drug itself, but the lack of safety nets. Homeless shelters across Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, and Davenport report growing numbers of residents struggling with fentanyl addiction. Outreach workers describe finding people overdosed in alleyways, under bridges, and even in the doorways of businesses. Narcan, the life-saving drug that can reverse opioid overdoses, is used daily, sometimes multiple times on the same person, but there are not enough doses or enough trained volunteers to keep up. The crisis is not limited to the big cities. Rural Iowa, with its small communities and limited healthcare resources, has been hit just as hard, if not harder. In towns where everyone knows everyone, overdoses are ripping through families. Homelessness in rural areas often looks different from urban homelessness. It may mean living in a car, couch surfing, or camping in the woods. These individuals are often invisible to the public, but fentanyl finds them all the same. In small towns without treatment centers or emergency shelters, overdoses often end in tragedy simply because help cannot arrive in time. To understand why the homeless are particularly vulnerable, one has to look at the cycle of addiction and poverty. Yes, many who end up on the streets in Iowa come from broken homes, abusive relationships, or economic collapse. When fentanyl enters this picture, it does not just create addiction, it accelerates the path to death. For someone already struggling with alcoholism, untreated mental illness, or long-term meth use, the sudden introduction of fentanyl can overwhelm the body. The drug is cheap, accessible, and often disguised, making it nearly impossible to avoid. Outreach teams in Iowa describe it as a time bomb hidden in every corner of the homeless community. Behind every statistic is a face, a name, a story. Take, for example, the case of a 42-year-old man named Mark, who once worked construction jobs across Iowa. After an injury left him unable to work, he spiraled into addiction and eventually became homeless in Des Moines. Friends say he tried repeatedly to get clean, but relapsed every time because fentanyl-laced pills were everywhere. One winter night, he was found frozen in a park restroom, a needle still in his arm. His story is not unique. It represents hundreds of lives cut short by a drug deadlier than anything the state has faced before. Law enforcement is fighting an uphill battle. Fentanyl is easy to smuggle in small amounts, and cartels have found ways to push it into Iowa through interstate highways that cut across the Midwest. Police seizures of fentanyl have skyrocketed, but each bust seems to barely scratch the surface. Officers say the drug is now so prevalent that every arrest, every traffic stop, and every raid turns up fentanyl in some form. But even with these seizures, the supply keeps flowing, overwhelming efforts to contain it. Healthcare providers are also struggling. Emergency rooms in Iowa are seeing a surge of overdoses, often from homeless individuals brought in unconscious. Doctors and nurses use Narcan to bring people back, but sometimes even multiple doses do not work against the potency of the fentanyl flooding the streets. Hospitals report seeing the same patients repeatedly, a cycle of overdose, revival, and relapse. Without access to long-term treatment programs, many are discharged back to the streets, where the same dangers await them again. The fentanyl crisis is not just about drugs, it is about despair. For the homeless, fentanyl provides an escape from the harsh realities of living without shelter, security, or hope. It numbs the pain of sleeping in the cold, of hunger, of rejection by society. But the cost of that escape is often death. Outreach workers say that many homeless individuals know the risks but continue to use because their reality feels unbearable. One outreach volunteer put it bluntly, "When you have nothing left, fentanyl doesn't scare you. Living scares you more." Faith-based organizations, nonprofits, and volunteers are stepping in where government systems fall short. In cities like Des Moines, mobile outreach vans distribute food, blankets, and Narcan kits directly to encampments. Some shelters now train staff to administer Narcan on the spot. Churches open their doors at night to provide safe spaces, but resources are stretched thin. Donations keep some programs alive, but the scale of the crisis demands far more than charity can provide. Families of victims are speaking out too, desperate to raise awareness about the dangers of fentanyl. Many say they never imagined their loved ones would end up homeless or addicted, but the drug showed no mercy. Parents described the pain of watching children fall into addiction, disappear into the streets, and finally receive a call that they overdosed. These stories cut across all demographics, rich and poor, young and old, rural and urban. Fentanyl does not discriminate, but it finds fertile ground in the lives of the homeless, where every vulnerability is magnified. Policymakers in Iowa are under immense pressure to act. Some advocate for stronger law enforcement measures, tougher sentences for dealers, and more border control. Others argue for harm reduction strategies like safe injection sites, expanded Narcan distribution, and free testing strips that can detect fentanyl in drugs. But the political debate often stalls progress, leaving frontline workers to fight the crisis with limited tools. What everyone agrees on, however, is that the fentanyl epidemic is tearing communities apart and killing people at a pace never seen before. The deeper issue is homelessness itself. Without stable housing, treatment becomes nearly impossible. A person cannot focus on recovery when they do not know where they will sleep or how they will eat. Housing first initiatives, which provide shelter without preconditions, have shown promise in other states. Advocates believe Iowa must adopt these strategies on a larger scale, creating a foundation for homeless individuals to rebuild their lives. Without addressing the root causes of homelessness, the cycle of fentanyl overdoses will only continue. The fentanyl crisis has also revealed gaps in America's healthcare system. Many homeless people in Iowa lack insurance or access to affordable healthcare. Even when they want treatment, the waiting list for rehab programs can stretch for months. In that time, many relapse or die before ever stepping foot into a treatment center. This delay is deadly, and experts argue that expanding immediate access to treatment is as critical as distributing Narcan. There is also a cultural stigma attached to homelessness and addiction that prevents many from seeking help. Society often views the homeless as failures or criminals, rather than as individuals caught in cycles of trauma and poverty. This stigma not only isolates them further, but also reduces public support for programs that could save lives. Changing the narrative, seeing the homeless as human beings deserving of dignity, may be one of the hardest but most necessary steps in tackling the fentanyl crisis. As Iowa grapples with this epidemic, there are glimmers of hope. Grassroots movements are growing and communities are coming together to find solutions. Volunteers, healthcare workers, and families are refusing to give up on their loved ones. Small victories, like a single life saved by Narcan or a person entering treatment, matter deeply in this fight. Each success proves that even in the darkest corners of despair, hope can survive. But the question remains, what will it take to stop what's killing the homeless in Iowa? Will it be stricter drug enforcement, expanded healthcare access, or a fundamental shift in how we address homelessness? The answer is likely a combination of all these things. What is clear, however, is that doing nothing is not an option. Every day of delay means more lives lost, more families shattered, and more communities grieving. In the end, the fentanyl crisis in Iowa is not just about drugs, it is about people. It is about the homeless man shivering under a bridge, the woman huddled in a shelter with her children, the teenager sleeping in a car after being kicked out of their home. It is about the lives cut short and the potential wasted. If there is one lesson Iowa can teach the rest of the nation, it is that the fentanyl epidemic is not confined to big cities or condescending places. It is here, in the heartland, killing the people we often overlook. The time to act is now. Iowa cannot afford to lose another generation to fentanyl. The homeless cannot afford to wait for policies that may never come. What's killing the homeless in Iowa is not just fentanyl, it is neglect, poverty, and the absence of hope. Only by confronting all these forces together can the state begin to turn the tide. Until then, the streets of Iowa will continue to tell the same tragic story. A story of drugs, despair, and lives lost too soon.